Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Devastator as the massive warship slowly emerged from its 20-year deep space patrol. The stars looked different now, though he could not say exactly how. Something felt wrong in the silence that greeted their return to human space. No welcoming signals came through the communication arrays, no routine. Traffic chatter filled the channels that should have been busy with merchant vessels and patrol ships. Commander Lisa Rodriguez walked up beside him, her face showing the same concern that Jake felt growing in his chest. She held a data pad in her hands, its screen flickering with incoming transmissions that had been waiting for them in the deep space relay stations. Lisa had been his second in command for 15 years, and Jake knew that expression on her face meant bad news was coming. "Captain, you need to see this," Lisa said quietly, handing him the data pad. Her voice carried a weight that made Jake's stomach turn cold even before he looked at the screen. The first message was dated 3 years ago, marked with the highest priority codes that Earth Command used only for the worst. Emergencies. Jake read the message twice before the words truly sank into his mind. The Zeltharian Empire had attacked the Outer Rim colonies. Not just attacked them, but conquered them completely. Dozens of human worlds had fallen in a coordinated assault that caught Earth's defenses completely unprepared. The messages that followed painted a picture that made Jake's hands shake with rage. The Zeltharians had not simply occupied the human colonies. They had turned every human civilian into slaves, forcing families to work in mining operations that stripped the planets of their resources. Children as young as 6 years old were put to work in the alien factories. Adults who tried to resist were executed in front of their families as examples to others who might think about fighting back. How many colonies? Jake asked, though. He was afraid to hear the answer. Lisa looked down at her own data pad and read through the list of fallen worlds. Each name was a place where millions of humans had built lives, raised families, and dreamed of a peaceful future among the stars. 47 confirmed lost, Lisa replied. Communications went dark on another 15 worlds, so we assume they fell too. The Zeltharians moved fast and hit everything at once. Earth Command never had time to send help to most of the colonies. Jake felt something cold and hard settle in his chest as he processed this information. 62 human worlds enslaved while the Devastator had been exploring empty space on the galaxy's edge. Millions of humans suffering under alien masters, while he and his crew had been mapping star systems that would now never be colonized. Communications. Officer Danny Walsh called out from his station across the bridge. "Captain, I'm receiving stored messages from the colonies that fell in the first wave. Some of them managed to get distress calls out before communications were cut." Danny's young face was pale as he looked at the data streaming across his screens. "Put them on the main speakers," Jake ordered. He needed to hear what had happened to understand the full scope of this disaster. The first voice that came through the speakers belonged to a woman who sounded terrified but determined to get her message out. "This is Colony 7 on Kepler Prime. The Zeltharian ships are landing now. They're rounding up all the children and separating them from their parents. Please, if anyone receives this message, tell Earth what happened here. Tell them we tried to fight, but they had too many ships. Tell them we died as humans, not as slaves." The message cut off abruptly, replaced by static that seemed to echo through the quiet bridge. Jake felt every member of his crew listening to the silence that followed. More messages came through the speakers, each one telling the same story of families torn apart, children enslaved, and human dignity destroyed by alien conquerors who saw humans as nothing more than useful animals. A child's voice came through. The speakers next, barely old enough to speak clearly, but trying desperately to send a message to someone who might help. "Mommy says to tell Earth that the bad aliens took Daddy away. She says someone needs to come help us. because there are too many bad aliens and not enough good humans to fight them. Jake turned off the speakers because he could not bear to hear any more. Around him, he could see his crew struggling with the same mixture of rage and helplessness that was eating at his own heart. These were not just statistics or casualty reports. These were the voices of humans who had suffered and died while the Devastator had been too far away to help them. Chief, Engineer Pete Johnson approached the captain's chair with a grim expression on his weathered face. Pete had served on the Devastator longer than anyone except Jake himself, and the old engineer had never looked as serious as he did now. Captain, I've been reviewing our weapon systems while listening to those messages. We've got capabilities that Earth Command never intended when they designed this ship. Jake looked at Pete with interest. The Devastator had been built as an exploration vessel with defensive weapons, but Pete had spent 20 years modifying and improving every system on the ship. If Pete said they had unusual capabilities, Jake wanted to know exactly what that meant. The quantum disruption cannons were designed for mining operations and clearing space debris, Pete continued. But I've been running calculations on what would happen if we reconfigured them for military use. The power output would be unlike anything the galaxy has ever seen. We could punch through the heaviest shielding like it was paper. Lisa stepped closer to hear Pete's explanation. What kind of modifications are you talking about? How long would it take to implement them? Her tactical mind was already working through the possibilities that Pete's words suggested. Give me 6 hours and I can turn this exploration ship into the most dangerous weapon in human space, Pete replied. The Zeltharians won't be expecting anything like what we could bring to their front door. They conquered our colonies because they thought humans were weak and peaceful. Maybe it's time to show them how wrong they were. Jake looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. These were good people who had signed up to explore the galaxy and expand human knowledge. None of them had expected to return home to find their people enslaved and their colonies destroyed. But now they were being asked to become something different, something harder and more dangerous than they had ever planned to be. Medical. Officer Susan Blake spoke up from her station near the back of the bridge. Captain, I've been reviewing the intelligence reports about Zeltharian biology. If we're considering military action, there are things you need to know about how their society works. Susan was the closest thing to a xenobiologist that the Devastator carried, and her knowledge would be crucial for any operation against the aliens. The Zeltharians only respect strength, Susan continued. Every diplomatic contact we've had with them confirms this. They see mercy as weakness and negotiation as surrender. Earth Command spent 3 years trying to find a peaceful solution, while the Zeltharians kept taking more colonies and enslaving more humans. Jake stood up from his captain's chair and walked to the main viewing screen that showed the star field. Ahead of them, somewhere out there, millions of humans were suffering under alien rule while their own government continued to search for diplomatic solutions that would never come. The Zeltharians had made their position clear through their actions, and now humanity needed to respond in the only language the aliens understood. Pete, begin the weapons modifications immediately, Jake ordered. Lisa, start plotting courses to the nearest Zeltharian military installations. Danny, send a message to Earth Command informing them that the UES Devastator is beginning immediate combat operations against Zeltharian forces. Lisa looked surprised at the captain's quick decision. Sir, shouldn't we wait for orders from Earth Command? They might have a larger strategy that we could interfere with. Her concern was reasonable, but Jake had already considered that possibility and rejected it. Earth Command has had 3 years to develop a strategy, and 62 human colonies are still enslaved, Jake replied. Sometimes the right thing to do is also the simple thing to do. The Zeltharians want to see human strength, so we're going to show them more strength than they ever imagined possible. The bridge fell silent as the crew absorbed their captains. words, and the mission that lay ahead of them. They were no longer explorers sailing peacefully through the galaxy. They had become humanity's sword of vengeance, and they would not rest until every human slave was free, and every Zeltharian who had participated in this atrocity paid the price for their cruelty. The UE's Devastator dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Corvin Prime system, its sensors immediately beginning their scan of the Zeltharian stronghold ahead. Captain Jake Morrison studied the tactical display that showed a heavily fortified world surrounded by defensive platforms and patrol ships. This was the regional command center where the aliens coordinated their slave operations across dozens of human colonies. Science Officer Amy Carter worked at her station, analyzing the energy signatures and defensive patterns that her instruments detected around the planet. Amy had spent years studying alien technology during their deep space mission, but the Zeltharian installations showed a level of military preparation that surprised even her experienced eye. "Captain, I'm detecting something unusual about their defensive positioning," Amy reported. "The Zeltharians have placed their most important military installations in close proximity to large concentrations of human life signs. They're using our people as living shields around their command centers and weapons platforms." Jake felt his jaw tighten as he processed this information. The aliens were not content to simply enslave humans. They were now using them as protection against rescue attempts. It was a calculated cruelty that showed exactly how the Zeltharians viewed human life and human dignity. Weapons Specialist Ray Thompson looked up from his console, where he had been reviewing the modifications that Pete Johnson's engineering teams had completed during their journey to Corvin Prime. The quantum disruption cannons were now capable of selective targeting, based on biological signatures, a capability that had never been tested in actual combat conditions. "Sir, I've been working with the new targeting systems," Ray said. "We can configure the quantum cannons to disrupt only Zeltharian biosignatures while leaving human cellular structures completely unaffected. The weapons will essentially ignore any human in the target area while eliminating every alien presence." Medical Officer Susan Blake approached the tactical station with concern evident on her face. "Captain, even if we can physically protect the human prisoners during our attack, we need to consider the psychological impact of what they'll witness. These people have been enslaved for years, and suddenly seeing their captors destroyed in front of them could cause severe trauma." Jake considered Susan's warning carefully. The rescued humans would need care and support after their liberation, but that could not change the immediate necessity of freeing them from Zeltharian control. Sometimes the path to healing required passing through difficult experiences that could not be avoided. "We'll deal with the psychological effects after we've gotten our people to safety," Jake decided. "Right now, the priority is breaking the chains that hold them. Susan, prepare medical teams for mass casualty support and trauma counseling. We're going to have a lot of people who need help processing what they've been through." "Commander Lisa." Rodriguez finished her analysis of the Zeltharian fleet positions and turned to address the captain. "Sir, they have 37 combat vessels in system, including 6 heavy cruisers that appear to be their most advanced designs. Based on our intelligence reports, they're expecting us to follow standard human naval doctrine and attempt negotiations before any military action." The main viewing screen showed the alien fleet beginning to move into attack formation as they detected the Devastator's presence. Jake could see that the Zeltharians were confident in their superior numbers and defensive advantages. They had no reason to fear a single human ship, especially one that had arrived without support vessels or backup from Earth Command. Communications. Officer Danny Walsh received an incoming transmission from the Zeltharian fleet commander. "Captain, they're demanding that we surrender and prepare to be boarded. The message says that any resistance will result in the execution of human prisoners on the planet's surface." Jake looked at the alien fleet arrayed against them and felt Something cold and final settled in his mind. The Zeltharians still believed they could intimidate humans with threats against innocent people. They were about to learn that their tactics would no longer work against an enemy who understood the true nature of this conflict. "Danny, open a channel to the Zeltharian commander," Jake ordered. It's time they heard from humanity's new voice. Danny nodded and established the connection that would carry Jake's words to the alien fleet and probably to monitoring stations throughout Zeltharian space. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the U-East Devastator," Jake began, his voice carrying the weight of humanity's accumulated rage and determination. "You have enslaved our people and destroyed our colonies while believing that humans were too weak to respond effectively. You were wrong about our strength, and you are wrong about our willingness to accept injustice." Jake paused for a moment, knowing that his next words would define humanity's relationship with the Zeltharian Empire for whatever time remained to that empire. "We offer you one opportunity to release all human prisoners immediately and withdraw from human space permanently. If you refuse this offer, we will demonstrate why mercy should never be mistaken for weakness." The Zeltharian commander's response came quickly, filled with the arrogance that had characterized all their interactions with humans. The alien voice carried contempt and amusement at what they saw as human desperation in the face of overwhelming odds. "Humans are prey animals who dream of being predators," the Zeltharian commander replied. "Your single vessel will be destroyed, and the prisoners on our planet will watch your death as a lesson in the futility of resistance. Surrender now, and we will allow you to join your people in productive slavery." Jake nodded to Ray Thompson, who had been waiting for the signal to begin targeting procedures. "Ray, lock onto every Zeltharian vessel in the system. Configure the quantum cannons for maximum disruption effect. Show them what human weapons technology can accomplish when we stop holding back." The first quantum disruption blast struck the lead Zeltharian cruiser with an effect that none of the aliens had ever witnessed before. The energy beam did not simply penetrate the ship's shields and armor. It caused the molecular bonds holding the vessel together to unravel at the atomic level. In seconds, a massive warship that had terrorized human colonies simply ceased to exist, leaving only empty space where it had been. The remaining Zeltharian ships scattered in panic as their sensors tried to understand what had just happened to their flagship. Their weapons had never seen anything that could completely disintegrate matter at the quantum level, and their tactical computers had no response protocols for this type of attack. Doc Ray continued his targeting sequence, eliminating Zeltharian vessels with methodical precision. Each quantum blast erased another ship from existence, while the aliens frantically tried to mount some kind of effective response. Their own weapons struck the Devastator's shields, but caused no significant damage to the human vessel's advanced defensive systems. Marine Commander Tony Garcia prepared his assault teams for planetary operations while the space battle continued around Corvin Prime. "Captain, my teams are ready for immediate deployment to the prison facilities on the surface. We have precise locations for the human captives based on Amy's sensor readings." Jake watched the tactical display as the last Zeltharian ships were eliminated from the system. "Tony, begin ground operations immediately. Extract all human prisoners and eliminate any Zeltharian forces that attempt to interfere with the rescue mission. The rules of engagement are simple. Any alien who threatens a human prisoner dies." Tony's Marines descended to the planet's surface in assault shuttles that cut through the atmosphere like falling stars. The Zeltharian ground forces had been demoralized by watching their entire fleet disappear in minutes, and most offered only token resistance to the human rescue operation. Amy monitored the surface operations from her science station. "Captain, I'm reading massive concentrations of human life signs in underground facilities across the northern continent. It looks like the Zeltharians have been using our people as forced labor in deep mining operations." The first group of liberated humans was brought aboard the Devastator within hours of the landing operation. Jake watched through the security monitors as families were reunited after years of separation. Children saw their parents again, and adults who had given up hope. Of Rescue realized that humanity had finally come for them, but he also saw the psychological damage that Susan Blake had warned about. Many of the rescued humans flinched away from their rescuers, having learned to fear anyone in uniform. Others stared with empty eyes that had seen too much suffering to process their sudden freedom. Some wept uncontrollably, while others seemed unable to believe that their nightmare was really over. One young girl, who could not have been more than 8 years old, approached Jake as he visited the medical bay where the rescued humans were being treated. She looked up at him with eyes that were far too old for her face and asked a question that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "Are you going to hurt the bad aliens like they hurt us?" She asked in a small voice that carried the weight of years of abuse and fear. Jake knelt down to her level and tried to find words that would be honest without being frightening. Word of Corvin Prime's destruction spread through Zeltharian space faster than the used Devastator could travel between star systems. Captain Jake Morrison read the intercepted alien communications with grim satisfaction as panic began to take hold in the upper levels of the Zeltharian Empire. They had never faced an enemy capable of completely eliminating their forces without taking significant casualties in return. Intelligence Officer Kelly Murphy worked at her station to decode and analyze the flood of Zeltharian military communications that their victory had triggered. The aliens were desperately trying to understand what had happened to their regional command center and how a single human vessel had destroyed an entire fleet without apparent effort. "Captain, I'm intercepting communications from the Zeltharian High Command," Kelly reported. "They're ordering all military installations to implement emergency protocols and requesting immediate negotiations with Earth Command. The message specifically mentions their willingness to discuss prisoner exchanges and territorial adjustments." Jake felt cold amusement at the alien attempt to return to diplomacy now that they had experienced human military capabilities. 3 years, the Zeltharians had ignored every peaceful overture from Earth while continuing to enslave more human colonies. Now they wanted to negotiate only because they had finally encountered consequences for their actions. "Kelly, transmit our response on all Zeltharian frequencies," Jake ordered. "Tell them that humanity tried diplomacy for 3 years while they enslaved our people and destroyed our colonies. They had their chance for peaceful coexistence, and they chose slavery and conquest instead. Now they will face the results of that choice." Commander Lisa Rodriguez approached the captain's chair with navigation data for their next target. The liberated humans from Corvin Prime had provided intelligence about other prison facilities throughout the sector, and Lisa had identified the most efficient route to maximize both rescue operations and psychological impact on the enemy. "Sir, our next target should be the Zeltharian Processing Center at Beta Orionis," Lisa suggested. "According to the survivors, that's where they separate human families and decide who gets sent to which labor facilities. It's also a major transportation hub for their slave operations throughout this entire region." Navigation Officer Chris Allen pulled up the star charts, showing their route to Beta Orionis. "Captain, if we hit the processing center next, we'll be cutting off the Zeltharian ability to redistribute prisoners between facilities. It should make our subsequent rescue operations much easier." Jake approved the navigation plan and watched as the Devastator entered faster-than-light travel toward their next target. Around him, his crew worked with the focused efficiency of people who had found their true purpose. They were no longer explorers sailing peacefully through the galaxy. They had become humanity's instrument of justice among the stars. Medical Officer Susan Blake provided updates on the condition of the rescued humans from Corvin Prime. "Captain, We've processed about 60% of the survivors so far. Most are suffering from malnutrition and exhaustion, but they're responding well to treatment. The psychological evaluations are more concerning. Many of them are having difficulty accepting that they're actually free. Jake understood the psychological challenges that the rescued humans faced. After years of brutal enslavement, it would take time for them to believe that their nightmare was truly over. Some had been children when they were captured and had no clear memories of life before Zeltharian rule. Others had watched family members die in the alien labor camps and carried guilt about their own survival. One of the rescued humans, a middle-aged man named Robert Kane, had asked to speak with the captain privately. Robert had been a colonial administrator on Kepler Prime before the Zeltharian invasion, and his knowledge of the alien administration systems could be valuable for future operations. Captain Morrison, I need you to understand something about how the Zeltharian slave system works, Robert said when they met in Jake's ready room. They don't just use humans for labor. They've been conducting experiments on our people, trying to understand human psychology and physiology. Some of the prisoners you'll find have been subjected to procedures that change them. Jake felt his anger deepen as he processed this new information. The Zeltharians had not been content to simply enslave humans. They had been treating them as experimental subjects in research programs that violated every principle of sentient rights that existed in galactic law. What kind of experiments? Jake asked, though he was not sure he wanted to hear the answer. Robert's expression grew even more troubled as he prepared to explain the full scope of Zeltharian cruelty toward human prisoners. Mind control research, genetic modification attempts, chemical conditioning programs, Robert replied. They're trying to create more compliant slaves who won't resist or try to escape. Some of the people you rescue might not be able to function normally ever again. Jake absorbed this information and added it to his growing understanding of why the Zeltharian Empire needed to be completely eliminated. These were not conquerors who could be negotiated with or reformed through diplomatic pressure. They were systematic abusers who saw other species as nothing more than resources to be exploited in whatever way served their interests. Devastator dropped out of faster-than-light travel at Beta Orionis to find a much larger Zeltharian presence than they had encountered at Corvin Prime. The processing center was protected by over 60 warships and multiple defensive platforms that bristled with weapons, designed to prevent exactly the kind of rescue operation that Jake had planned. Tactical. Officer Ryan Hughes analyzed the enemy formations and identified the most efficient targeting sequence. Captain, the Zeltharians have learned from Corvin Prime. They've positioned their ships in overlapping defensive patterns and placed the human prisoners in facilities that are heavily shielded. This is going to be more complicated than our last engagement. Weapons specialist Ray Thompson reviewed the targeting data and proposed modifications to their attack pattern. Sir, I recommend we begin with precision strikes against their command vessels to disrupt their coordination. Once their fleet is in disarray, we can focus on the facility shields and begin extraction operations. Jake approved the battle plan and watched as the Zeltharian fleet moved to engage the Devastator. The aliens had clearly studied the reports from Corvin Prime and were attempting to use superior numbers and coordinated tactics to overwhelm the human vessel. They still did not understand the true capabilities of the quantum disruption weapons. First quantum cannon blast eliminated 3 Zeltharian ships that had been flying in close formation. The aliens had not realized that the disruption field could be expanded to affect multiple targets simultaneously, and their tactical formation worked against them as the quantum energy spread from ship to ship. Doc Ray continued his targeting sequence, while the remaining Zeltharian vessels tried to scatter and avoid the fate of their companions. Some of the alien commanders attempted to use ramming attacks against the Devastator, sacrificing their own ships in desperate attempts to cause damage to the human vessel. Their weapons could not penetrate the Devastator's advanced shields, and their ramming attempts only resulted in more ships being eliminated by quantum disruption. Chief Engineer Pete Johnson monitored the weapon systems from his engineering station. "Captain, the quantum cannons are performing beyond all theoretical specifications. We can maintain this rate of fire indefinitely without any risk of system overload or power depletion. The Zeltharians literally cannot build ships fast enough to replace the ones we're destroying." Within 30 minutes, the entire Zeltharian fleet at Beta Orionis had been eliminated. The defensive platforms around the processing center attempted to continue the fight, but their weapons were even less effective than the ships had been. Jake watched as each platform was systematically destroyed, clearing the way for ground operations to begin. Marine Commander Tony Garcia led his assault teams to the planet's surface, while Amy Carter guided them to the locations of human prisoners. The processing center was a massive complex that held over 200,000 humans in various stages of the Zeltharian classification system. Amy's sensors detected the full scope of the alien operation as Tony's Marines fought their way through the facility. "Captain, this is worse than we expected. They have humans sorted into categories based on age, physical capability, intelligence levels, and resistance to authority. It's like they're running a systematic breeding program to create ideal slaves." Jake felt sick as he understood the implications of Amy's report. The Zeltharians were not just enslaving individual humans. They were attempting to reshape humanity itself to serve their purposes. Children were being separated from parents, not just for labor assignments, but for genetic and psychological conditioning programs designed to eliminate human independence and dignity. Tony's voice came through the communication system with updates from the ground operation. "Captain, we've secured the main processing areas, but some of the deeper facilities are more heavily defended. The Zeltharians are using human prisoners as shields and threatening to execute them if we advance further." The Zeltharian Empire made its final stand at their capital world of Zethos, assembling every remaining warship and calling in military forces from across their territory. Captain Jake Morrison studied the tactical display showing the massive fleet that surrounded the alien homeworld, knowing that this battle would determine the fate of millions of enslaved beings throughout the galaxy. Tactical analyst Maria Santos worked to process the intelligence data that reconnaissance probes had gathered about the Zeltharian final defensive position. The aliens had learned from their previous defeats and implemented strategies specifically designed to counter the Devastator's quantum weapon systems. "Captain, they've positioned human prisoners throughout their defensive network," Maria reported. "Not just as shields this time, but as integral components of their weapon systems and shield generators. If we attack their installations directly, we'll be forced to harm our own people to reach the alien targets." Jake felt the calculated cruelty of the Zeltharian strategy, like a physical weight pressing down on his chest. The aliens had studied human psychology well enough to understand that humans would sacrifice their own tactical advantages to protect innocent lives. They were betting that human compassion would prevent the kind of decisive action that had destroyed their other facilities. Engineering Chief Ben Clark approached the captain's chair with preliminary reports from his technical teams. "Sir, we've been analyzing the Zeltharian defensive modifications, and I think we can counter their strategy. If we can get precise location data for every human prisoner in their system, we might be able to use the quantum weapons in ways they haven't anticipated." Jake looked at Ben with interest, knowing that the engineer's mind worked in ways that consistently surprised both enemies and allies. "What kind of modifications are you thinking about, Ben?" The question carried the weight of millions of lives that depended on finding a solution to the Zeltharian defensive strategy. "Selective quantum tunneling," Ben replied. "Instead of destroying their installations, we extract the human prisoners directly through dimensional displacement. We pull our people out of their defensive network and leave the aliens with no leverage and no protection. Science Officer Amy Carter reviewed Ben's proposal from her station. Captain, the quantum tunneling process would require precise biological targeting on a scale we've never attempted before. We'd need to identify and lock onto every human life sign in the system simultaneously, while avoiding any effect on the Zeltharian population. Jake considered the technical challenges and the risks involved in such a complex operation. The margin for error was essentially zero, because any mistake could result in human casualties or leave prisoners behind to face Zeltharian revenge. But the alternative was accepting alien terms. That would allow the Empire to continue enslaving other species. Communications. Officer Danny Walsh received an incoming transmission from the Zeltharian fleet commander. Captain, they're demanding negotiations for a prisoner exchange. They claim to have over 3 million human captives positioned throughout their defensive systems, and they're threatening mass executions if we advance any closer to their homeworld. Jake looked at the alien fleet arrayed against them and saw the desperation beneath their apparent strength. The Zeltharians had committed everything to this final battle because they understood that defeat here would mean the end of their empire. They were fighting not just for victory, but for their survival as a dominant species. Danny, open a channel to the Zeltharian commander, Jake ordered. It's time they heard our final terms. Danny established the connection, knowing that this exchange would determine whether the battle ahead would be a rescue operation or a war of extermination. This is Captain Jake Morrison of the UE's Devastator, Jake began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had already proven his ability to destroy entire fleets. You have 3 million human prisoners that you're using as shields for your military installations. Release them immediately, and we'll allow your civilian population to evacuate before we eliminate your military capabilities. The Zeltharian commander's response revealed the arrogance that had defined their empire's relationship with other species. Humans are valuable resources that we have invested considerable effort to acquire and train. We do not release valuable assets to satisfy the demands of inferior species. Withdraw from our territory, or watch your people die as examples of the price of resistance. Jake nodded to Ben Clark, who had been preparing the quantum tunneling systems during the negotiation. Ben, begin the extraction sequence. Lock onto every human biosignature in the system and prepare for simultaneous dimensional displacement. We're bringing our people home. Amy Carter coordinated the massive scanning operation required to identify and target millions of human prisoners scattered throughout the Zeltharian defensive network. Her sensors worked at maximum sensitivity to distinguish human life signs from alien ones while mapping the exact locations of every person who needed to be rescued. Captain, I'm reading human life signs in over 4,000 separate locations throughout the system, Amy reported. They've distributed our people across their entire infrastructure, from weapons platforms to shield generators to command centers. Some prisoners are being held in the Zeltharian capital city itself. Ben's engineering teams worked frantically to calibrate the quantum tunneling systems for the largest rescue operation in human history. The technical requirements pushed their equipment beyond all design specifications, but Ben had spent years modifying the Devastator systems to handle exactly this kind of impossible challenge. 30 seconds to extraction initiation, Ben announced. All human targets had been locked and verified. Quantum tunneling fields are stable and ready for activation. His voice carried the confidence of someone who had solved problems that other engineers considered theoretically impossible. Jake watched the tactical display showing the Zeltharian fleet holding position around their homeworld, confident that their human shields would protect them from attack. The aliens had made the fundamental error of believing that their cruelty gave them an advantage over enemies who valued innocent life above tactical convenience. "Execute extraction," Jake ordered. The quantum tunneling systems activated with a power surge that briefly dimmed the lights throughout the Devastator. On the tactical display, 3 million human life signs simultaneously disappeared from Zaltharian installations and reappeared in the cargo bays and medical facilities of the human vessel. The effect on the Zaltharian defensive network was immediate and catastrophic. Shield generators failed as their human operators vanished. Weapons platforms went offline as their crews disappeared, and command centers fell silent as the prisoners who had been forced to operate alien equipment were suddenly elsewhere. In seconds, the most heavily defended system in Zaltharian space became completely vulnerable to attack. Medical Officer Susan Blake coordinated the massive effort required to process 3 million rescued humans who had been transported directly into the ship's medical facilities. "Captain, we have people materializing faster than we can process them. Most are in poor condition from malnutrition and exhaustion, but the quantum tunneling process appears to have caused no additional trauma." Tony Garcia's Marine teams worked to maintain order among the rescued prisoners who were struggling to understand what had happened to them. Many had been in the middle of forced labor when they suddenly found themselves aboard a human warship, and some could not immediately comprehend that their nightmare was finally overdone. Jake turned his attention back to the now defenseless Zaltharian fleet. "Maria, target their command vessels first. I want their leadership to understand that this is the price of building an empire on slavery and cruelty." Maria nodded and began the targeting sequence that would eliminate the core of Zaltharian. Military power. The quantum disruption cannons fired in sequence, each blast eliminating another Zaltharian warship from existence. The aliens attempted to return fire, but their weapons were designed for conventional warfare and had no effect on the Devastator's advanced defensive systems. One by one, the ships that had enforced Zaltharian rule across dozens of star systems simply ceased to exist. Ryan Hughes monitored the planetary bombardment systems as Jake prepared to deliver the final blow to the Zaltharian Empire. "Captain, I can configure the quantum weapons to destabilize the planet's core structure. The resulting gravitational collapse will eliminate the homeworld and any remaining fleet units in the system." Jake looked at the display showing Zethos and its surrounding defensive installations. Millions of Zaltharian civilians lived on the Vel planet's surface, but they were the same population that had supported and benefited from their empire's slave-based economy. The choice between justice and mercy was clear, and the time for mercy had passed years ago when the aliens first enslaved human children. "Ryan, begin core destabilization sequence," Jake ordered. "Target the planet's gravitational center and prepare for controlled collapse. Make sure the effect is contained to this system only." The words felt heavy in his mouth, but they were necessary to ensure that the Zaltharian Empire could never again threaten the freedom of any species. 6 months after the fall of Zethus, the U.S. Devastator returned to human space, carrying the legends of their campaign against the Zaltharian Empire. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge watching Earth grow larger on the main viewing screen, knowing that their ship and crew had fundamentally changed humanity's place in the galaxy. They were no longer a peaceful species, hoping for acceptance among the stars. They had become the force that other civilizations either sought as allies or feared as enemies. The rescued human populations had been resettled on new worlds, far from the sites of their former captivity, but the psychological scars of their enslavement would take generations to heal. Some of the liberated colonies had named their new settlements after crew members of the Devastator, creating permanent monuments to the people who had brought them freedom. Others struggled with the moral implications of the total warfare that had been necessary to secure their liberation. Counselor Janet Moore worked with the rescued populations to help them process their experiences and adapt to life in a galaxy where the Zeltharian Empire no longer existed. Captain, many of the survivors are having difficulty believing that they're truly safe, Janet reported during one of their regular briefings. Some have suggested that we should have tried to find a peaceful solution that didn't require destroying the entire Zeltharian civilization. Jake understood the complex emotions that the rescued humans experienced when they contemplated the price of their freedom. Children who had been enslaved since birth had no memory of peace and found it difficult to trust that their safety was permanent. Adults who had watched family members die in alien labor camps carried guilt about their own survival and wondered if the total destruction of their captors had been necessary or just communications. Officer Danny Walsh received priority transmissions from Earth Command as the Devastator approached the home system. Captain, we're being ordered to report immediately to Earth Command headquarters for debriefing and possible court-martial proceedings. The message indicates that some members of the government consider our actions to have exceeded our authority. Jake, read the official messages and felt amusement rather than concern at Earth's attempt to discipline him for eliminating a slave empire. The bureaucrats who wanted to court-martial him had spent 3 years searching for diplomatic solutions, while millions of humans suffered under alien rule. Now they were concerned about the legal implications of the rescue operation that had freed those people. Commander Lisa Rodriguez reviewed the intelligence reports that had been transmitted to Earth during their campaign. Sir, public opinion polls show overwhelming support for our actions. 78% of the human population considers the crew of the Devastator to be heroes who saved humanity from extinction. The government officials calling for court-martial proceedings are finding themselves increasingly isolated. The political situation on Earth became irrelevant when 3 separate alien civilizations transmitted formal surrender messages to Earth Command within hours of the Devastator's return. The Korthic Federation, the Spiral Alliance, and the Hegemony of Worlds had all witnessed the destruction of the Zeltharian Empire and decided that military conflict with humanity was not in their best interests. Science. Officer Amy Carter analyzed the alien surrender messages and their implications for human expansion into the galaxy. Captain, all 3 civilizations are offering immediate cessation of territorial disputes, recognition of human sovereignty over contested systems, and agreements to respect human colonization rights. They're basically giving us everything we've been trying to negotiate for decades. Jake realized that their campaign against the Zeltharians had accomplished more than just rescuing enslaved humans. Word of humanity's military capabilities had spread throughout the galaxy, fundamentally altering the balance of power between species. Civilizations that had previously seen humans as weak newcomers now understood that humanity possessed both the technology and the will to eliminate threats to innocent life. Chief Engineer Pete Johnson monitored the long-range communications arrays that were picking up transmissions from across the galaxy. Captain, I'm detecting massive changes in alien government policies throughout known space. Multiple civilizations are implementing new protections for enslaved populations and releasing prisoners who had been held for forced labor. The ripple effects of the Zeltharian Empire's destruction were spreading far beyond the systems that had been directly liberated by the Devastator. Alien civilizations were proactively ending their own slave programs rather than risk becoming humanity's next target. Fear of human retaliation was accomplishing what centuries of diplomatic protests had failed to achieve. Medical Officer Susan Blake provided updates on the psychological condition of the Devastator's crew as they processed their own experiences during the campaign. Captain, most of the crew are adapting well to their new status as galactic legends, but some are struggling with the moral weight of what we accomplished. Eliminating an entire civilization, even one as brutal as the Zeltharians, has affected everyone differently. Jake understood the psychological challenges that his crew faced as they transitioned from explorers to warriors to symbols of human power. They had done what was necessary to protect innocent life, but the scale of destruction required for that protection had changed them in ways that could never be reversed. They were no longer the same people who had departed Earth 20 years. Earlier, weapons specialist Ray Thompson approached the captain's chair with reports from Earth's military research divisions. "Sir, every human military installation is requesting detailed specifications for our quantum weapon systems. Earth Command wants to begin mass production of ships equipped with the same capabilities as the Devastator." Jake considered the implications of spreading quantum disruption technology throughout the human fleet. The weapons that had liberated millions of slaves could also be used for conquest and oppression if they fell into the wrong hands. Humanity's new position as the galaxy's dominant military power carried responsibilities that extended far beyond their own species. Ray, prepare. A recommendation that quantum weapons be restricted to rescue and defensive operations only, Jake decided. The galaxy has seen enough empires built on superior firepower. Humanity should be known for protecting the innocent, not for conquering the weak. Tony Garcia's Marine teams had been assigned to train Earth's ground forces in the liberation, techniques they had developed during the campaign. "Captain, the military academies want to create entire curricula based on our operational methods. They're calling it the Morrison Doctrine, and they want to teach it to every officer in the human fleet." Jake felt uncomfortable with the idea of his decisions becoming doctrine for future military operations. Each situation required its own analysis and response, and rigid adherence to predetermined strategies could lead to exactly the kind of systematic oppression that had characterized the Zaltharian Empire. Intelligence. Officer Kelly Murphy received updates from human diplomatic missions throughout the galaxy. "Captain, our ambassadors are reporting unprecedented cooperation from alien governments. Species that wouldn't even acknowledge our territorial claims 6 months ago are now offering mutual defense pacts and technology sharing agreements." Transformation of humanity's galactic status was complete, but Jake understood that their new position carried dangers as well as opportunities. Power could corrupt even those who gained it through righteous action, and humanity would need to remain vigilant against the temptation to use their military superiority for purposes other than protecting the innocent. 1 year after their return to Earth, Jake received a personal message from Helen Carter, the elderly woman who had been rescued from the Zaltharian homeworld system. She had been elected as the representative for all the liberated human populations, and her message carried the gratitude of millions of people who owed their freedom to the Devastator's campaign. "Captain Morrison, I wanted you to know that the children who were born in Zaltharian slavery are now attending schools on free worlds where they're learning about humanity's history among the stars." Helen wrote, "They understand that their freedom came at a terrible price, but they also understand that some prices must be paid to ensure that innocent people can live without fear." Jake shared Helen's message with his crew during one of their regular briefings. Aboard the Devastator, which had been assigned to patrol the galaxy's frontier regions. Their mission now was to serve as both protector and deterrent, ensuring that no other species would attempt to build an empire based on enslaving others. The crew had evolved beyond their original roles as explorers or even as warriors. They had become symbols of humanity's commitment to justice and freedom, carrying the responsibility of representing their entire species in their interactions with alien civilizations. Every decision they made would be studied and analyzed by governments throughout the galaxy. Navigation. Officer Chris Allen plotted their course toward a star system where reports suggested that a minor alien faction was attempting to revive Zaltharian-style slave operations.